While much attention is focused on the Ebola patient in Manhattan, there's a community in Staten Island that has paid unusually close attention to the epidemic in West Africa for months now. It is a neighborhood already feeling the toll in a very personal way. Again, to Sreenivasan, who spent part of this week in the community.
While you wouldn't know it just by looking, this stretch of apartment buildings in a neighborhood called Park Hill on Staten Island is the heart of the Liberian community in New York City. In fact, it's commonly known as Little Liberia. It's home to one of the largest concentrations of Liberians outside of West Africa. While this community is healthy, the Ebola outbreak happening 4,000 miles away still hits home. Fatu Love Kroma, who goes by Love, is a home health care worker who immigrated from Liberia in 2011.
The past months have been terrible for me.
She's one of the thousands of people in this neighborhood with family ties to Liberia. And she told us that 3 weeks ago, her pregnant sister saw a nurse who had previously dealt with Ebola patients.
But when my sister got in pain, there was like nowhere else to go.
So your sister died?
The baby died.
Her baby died?
Yeah. Her 13-year-old son died.
Her 13-year-old son died?
Yeah.
What's it been like in the United States when people hear that you're Liberian?
Well, I don't blame anybody because if it's me, I would do the same.
What Love is forgiving is what's happening to Liberians everywhere, according to Oretha Bestman Yates.
My gosh, we have been like the target.
Bestman Yates is the president of the Staten Island Liberian Community Association, or SILCA. She says the treatment of Liberians got worse after the news of Thomas Eric Duncan, the Liberian who died from Ebola in Texas earlier this month.
Then the stigma started, that Liberians were walking around with Ebola. Because with the 3 countries that are affected by Ebola, Liberia has become the face of Ebola.
So there's stigma here in New York?
In New York.
Because you're Liberian?
Because we are Liberians. When you get on the elevator, people get out of the elevator because they don't want to be on the elevator with you because you're from Africa. Just the accent alone,
Once they figure out you're from Africa, they're scared.
They're scared.
Bestman Yates said her own 6-year-old son, Jordan, came home from school one day saying that he wanted to only be American, not Liberian American, because the kids at school teased him of having Ebola. Since returning from Liberia in July after visiting family, Bestman Yates says she's had trouble going back to her job as a healthcare worker, even after receiving a clean bill of health from her doctor.
My employer is telling me for administrative reasons I cannot go to work. And what worries us is we are like the breadwinner right now for our people in Liberia because they're looking up to us, financially, because the government shut down, schools are shut down, no work.
In the meantime, Bestman Yates and SILCA are continuing their weekly food pantry for those in need in their neighborhood, but also raising money to send back to Liberia and helping educate. Earlier this week, SILCA helped organize a session on the immigration implications of the Ebola outbreak.
We are all family in here. If you have any concern about the Ebola, the immigration status, please, we have experts here to talk to you on that.
The session was run by Karina Bogachu, an attorney for a New York nonprofit that focuses on helping African immigrants.
So there are people who are stranded here, who are afraid to go back, are applying to extend their visitor visa, but in the meantime they can't work while they're here. So they can't work to support themselves and they can't work to support family back home who is struggling because of Ebola.
Stop Ebola now! Stop Ebola now!
This afternoon, dozens of protesters organized by African immigrant groups marched from Times Square toward the United Nations, asking for help in the fight against Ebola.